I'm sure, like me, you've heard the phrase perfect practice makes perfect. And we also know that we learn from our mistakes, don't we? So which one is it then? Well, I think I've settled on something that I'm calling working to the stage of manageable mistakes. So let me explain. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning playlists, or indeed anybody who loves piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it is your first trip here, then please do think about subscribing. Simply hit the little icon in the bottom right hand corner of your screen now, and it's all done for you. There's so much differing advice about how to practice piano that I have to admit I still get a bit confused about it all. Equally, we often hear great sound bites that sound fair enough, but in reality seem very difficult to achieve. And one of these, of course, is perfect practice makes perfect. Of course, this is perfectly logical, isn't it, in many ways? After all, if repetition, another soundbite, repetition is the mother of all learning, then the more often we repeat something correctly, the more secure it's bound to become. And of course, we're often then told that the way to practice something perfectly is simply to slow it right down so that it's at a speed at which we don't make any mistakes. And this too is extremely logical after all. If you slow most things down enough, then they become manageable, don't they? For me though, none of this tells us how do we get something to the point at which we're practicing it, where it's approaching how we want to be able to perform it. And the idea that we learn, in fact, from making mistakes is what got me to this idea of manageable mistakes. So then, how might we define this idea of manageable mistakes? And I think the easiest way to explain it is to just show you using a piece that I've done a tutorial on before, which is the Liszt Romance. For me, the hardest part of this was that middle section, the left hand specifically, in the più agitato section. And it gave me a lot of trouble to get it under control, and I'll be honest, even today, I still work on it from time to time because I want to get it much easier under my fingers. And the way I managed to practice this was I split it down and I simplified it. So I practiced it first with block chords. I later then practiced it with just the upward part of the left hand arpeggio. And then I did another couple of variants. And of course, I also practiced the entire left hand as written. What I also did was to split it roughly in half, using bars 38 to 47 as one segment, and then bars 48 to 55 as the second. So if I were to learn this again from scratch, then I'd start off, okay, with my first variant as being the block chords. And then I just pay very close attention to the kind of mistakes I'm making with these block chords. And by mistake, I don't mean necessarily just wrong notes. Is there a slight hesitation about what chord comes next? Do I need to slightly reposition my hand when I land before I play the notes? All of these things mean that, it's not comfortable and it's not natural for us just yet. And then by practicing, let's just say the first subsection to start with, if there's the odd mistake and the odd reposition of the hand here and there, then, that's arguably manageable, isn't it? It's only when there's a definite, say, one chord that is always wrong, or you always hesitate on, or whatever it may be, that then is not manageable in that sense. And that means you're practicing too big a part of it, or something that's too complicated for you to manage just yet. Then, as we keep practicing, of course, we'll fix all of those manageable mistakes and we'll get ourselves to the point where we're able to practice that particular part in that particular way without making mistakes, without feeling that it's difficult, and it all starts to feel easy and comfortable for us. And I then move on to my next practice goal, which in this particular case would be playing it with just the upward part of the arpeggio. Because I'd practiced the block chords to the point that they feel easy, now the jumps, the position changes shouldn't cause me any particular problem, and therefore just splitting out the notes into an arpeggio should be much more manageable for me. However, and this is where we do need to be careful, simply doing this and not paying attention, we can end up with a mistake that becomes unmanageable. By this, I mean if we are consistently playing the same note incorrectly, then clearly this is not a manageable mistake, is it? With this particular piece, for example, I found that for some reason, I'm not really sure why, but the jump to the D sharp was always, I don't know, error prone, and I hesitated and I was never quite sure about it. If we simply keep repeating along the sequence and always make the same mistake, then what happens is that mistake itself starts to get embedded into our motor memory, or our muscle memory if you prefer, and then it becomes extremely difficult to remove it. So if you do find something like this, make sure you then isolate just that particular little part until you manage to fix the mistake properly before going back to the longer section. I then again keep practicing in this manner until that also starts to feel easy and comfortable before moving on to the next practice variant. To my mind then, by doing it this way, we do manage to get ourselves to a point of perfect practice and we're able to repeat something reliably. Then it's simply a case of rinse and repeat as we move through our levels of difficulty until we're able to play the entire section end to end comfortably and without errors. What we need to be careful of as well with this technique, I found, is that not all parts will progress at the same rate. So we've got to be careful. Just because we've got one part, say, past the block chord stage, that we don't move everything past block chords until every particular part of it feels good. And what I noticed myself was that this particular chord was always giving me trouble. And when I moved to the arpeggio section, it was always the same thing that happened. I'd miss the note, I'd hesitate. And clearly that showed me that something wasn't right and I'd perhaps moved on too early. So I went back to playing it with block chords, and to my surprise I found that even at the block chord stage there was still hesitation and there were still wrong notes in there. So it goes to show that we do need to pay particular attention before we move something forward. If you've watched any of my other tutorial videos, you'll know that this is a way of practicing that I really like doing. You know, I split things down into smaller, more manageable chunks. If necessarily, I'll simplify something as I did with this romance to make it easier for me to practice. However, with hindsight, which is a great thing, isn't it? I feel that I've often been in too much of a rush to move forward to the next stage and not stayed with something until it does start to feel much easier under my fingers and getting me closer to the perfect practice makes perfect idea. I'm sure you'll be able to incorporate this idea into any of the pieces you're learning, whichever way you prefer to practice. I mean, for example, if you like to practice slowly with a metronome and gradually increase the speed, then of course the trick is to make sure you never increase the speed until you get to the point that your new speed feels comfortable to you. Equally, if you prefer to learn hands separately rather than hands together, then don't put both hands together until each individual hand starts to feel easy to you. Then as you practice, as you make mistakes, rather than worrying about these mistakes per se, ask yourself first the question, do they fit into the category of a manageable mistake that I'll be able to fix on the next repetition, or really do I have a problem here that I need to actually solve? As I'm sure you'll agree, for consistent mistakes, that's where the troubleshooting really needs to start, and maybe that's a topic for another day. So if you're not already, then please do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to click that little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I do thank you very much for watching today and look forward to seeing you very soon.